Welcome to Fantastic Intersections, the speculative in prose, poetry, and film. I'm Rashida Smith, the online program coordinator with Clarion West, coming to you from the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish people. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish people, past and present. Clarion West supports emerging and underrepresented voices by providing writers with world-class instruction to empower their creation of wild and amazing worlds. Through conversation and public engagement, we bring those voices to an ever-expanding community. Today's panel is part of that conversation. With me today are three of our fall instructors whose work draws the speculative into poetry, film, and new takes on familiar genres, respectively. Thanks for joining us. First up, Eden Royce is a returning Clarion West instructor. She is a Shirley Jackson Award nominee, and her debut middle grade Southern Gothic novel, Root Magic, is available now from Walden Pond Press, HarperCollins. Her class, Modern Southern Gothic, explored the way the Gothic tale is transformed by time and place. Therese Mason-Pierre is the co-editor-in-chief of Augur Magazine, a Canadian speculative literature journal, and the author of the chapbooks Surface Area and Manifest. Her upcoming class, The Power of Metaphor in Speculative Poetry, is designed for prose and poetry writers alike. Veteran filmmaker and first-time Clarion West instructor Nicoles Pouchette is currently a writer-director for the award-winning fantasy web series Strowlers. She will be teaching turning your work into short film for writers curious about the alchemy of transformation from story to film. For this panel, we'll be alternating readings from our panelists with conversation. I invite you to drop your comments and questions into the chat, and I'll try to wrap in as many of them as possible in our all too short time together. We're going to begin with a reading, and to kick us off, Eden will read for us.
Thank you so much, Rashida. Since we are still in October, I thought it might be a good choice to read from my debut novel, Root Magic, which, although it's a Southern Gothic, there are a few areas of horror within the text. So I think it might be appropriate to start with that. It was a doll. The doll was nothing like mine. This one looked like someone tried to carve a real person out of wood. A shock went through my body, starting at my head like a lightning strike, then moving down, down into my legs, freezing them to the spot. I wanted to get closer, to get a look at it, but it was in deeper water, a few feet out from where I stood. I searched around for a branch or something to use and came up empty. "Jay," I called for my brother, my voice ringing out over the stillness. "Got something here." My doll was going crazy now. It felt like she was pushing against my pocket with all of her tiny body. I didn't know what her problem was with some old doll in the marsh, but I'd find out after I figured out a way to haul it in. Surely another step would be okay, especially if I kept the marsh's edge in sight. I stepped into the water and the mud smooshed under my feet. The water, cooler than the air, made me shiver, but it only came halfway up my calf. The doll looked so much smaller now that I was almost on top of it, as though I could pick it up in one hand. My fingers waggled, barely scraping the muddy fabric of the strange doll's belly. Then, my hand sank inside it. My gasp was cut off quick as I was yanked forward into the tidal pool of standing marsh water. My knees hit the mud at the bottom of the marsh, splashing through the standing water left by the floods in the last hard rain. Then something strong, fiercely strong, gripped my right arm, still sunk inside the belly of the doll. It crawled up to my shoulder, adjusted its grip, then pulled harder. I screamed out, "Jay, Doc, help me!" My voice was swallowed up by a roar of air from the doll. I couldn't get free of the thing that had me, and I couldn't get to my doll. She was right in my pocket, and I was using my left arm to brace myself as I was pulled closer and closer to the surface of the water. I pulled back with all my strength, but whatever had my arm was stronger. I reached for the protection powder I'd made with Doc's graveyard dirt and powdered brick Maybe if I sprinkled it on the water, I could get free. But then I remembered I'd taken the bag out of my pocket and left it on the windowsill to dry, along with my bracelet of devil's shoestrings. Doc had told me never to go out without protection, and I had done just that. I tugged harder, screaming until my voice cracked and my throat was raw and sore. The puddle of water churned now, and I saw glimpses through its cloudy surface. The smell of the marsh surrounded me. Usually I loved the scent of it, rich with bubbling life, but there was something in it now that smelled burnt and bitter. I could taste it on my tongue. Whatever it was drew my head closer to the pool. I writhed and punched the water, but nothing I did made any difference. My heart was in my throat. I felt like I was choking on my fear. Cold water covered my lips and nose. Dinah was scratching against the inside of my pocket, my doll trying to get me help that I ignored before. Got you. And then laughter, hard, cruel laughter, just like the kids at school. My body tightened up and I flailed around, trying to get loose. I can't die like this. I can't leave Mama and Jay and Doc. I had to get away from that voice that sounded like creaking floors and smelled like used oil. Where was Jay now? I don't care about the boy, but a girl? I can use a girl. A lonely, scared little girl. I screamed again and my mouth filled with muddy water. I jerked away enough to lift my lips clear of the water and spit out the thick liquid, but that movement pressed my tummy forward into the puddle. I was soaked in an instant, the water so cold, and the shock of it raced through me. I kicked my legs, tried to get up, but my feet kept slipping in the mud and I couldn't get enough of a grip or a foothold to move away. You're my doll now, my little doll, and I'm going to fill you up. Something sharp poked, then pierced my side, full of pretty pins. I tried to settle myself, breathe deep, and think as Doc told us. What could I do? Another stick, this one needle sharp, entered my hip. When I hollered, the thing clutching my arm yanked hard, and my left elbow gave away, and I crashed face first into the salty, icy water. Bucking and struggling, I knew, would make me run out of air even faster. My lessons flashed in my head like fireworks. Doc had told me I had to bring my calmest self to the magic, but it was okay to be eager and excited. But negative emotions like fear and anger were not good when working root. Anything that would steal my power was surely evil, and I didn't want to make evil stronger. But how could I keep that from happening? Think, Jezebel. Mama and Doc had both said root work takes intent. Even Mama knew that, but she didn't work root. That's your power. Don't let anyone take it from you. The words echoed in my mind, weaving in and around the doll's triumphant laughter. I knew I didn't have the strength to get my body loose from this grip, but maybe that wasn't the only way to get free. And I'll stop there.
I don't know about anybody else, but I'm going to need to take a few deep breaths and have a drink of water. I'm terrified right now. That is so rich and visual and intense. Eden, you are Gothic fiction is something that has clearly drawn you and you've mastered it in such a very visceral way. Can you please tell us a little bit about your journey into the medium and what inspires you? And then we'll move that question on to everyone on the panel.
A huge part of my inspiration is my heritage and my upbringing. I loved reading as a little girl, still do, but so many of the books that I read when I was younger didn't have people that looked like me, didn't even have many Southern settings, certainly not the marshes of South Carolina. So I thought, taking a lot of the folklore that I heard growing up, the stories that my grandmother told me, even the creepy, scary ones about the monsters and the creatures that roam the night, I decided to put into root magic. But then I also wanted to add in a bit of joy and a bit of reprieve from all the spooky scariness, because I think Southern Gothic at its heart isn't always about fear, but it is about the lives of Southern people, which do have joy and respite and rest tied up with all of those tense, scary, edge of your seat moments. It's that, and also I think my love of watching Hammer horror movies when I was young, Twilight Zone episodes, all of those little creepy black and white things that used to come on PBS in the evenings. I had an obsession with those.
At the spooky stories for kids books used to I would check those out over and over again, read them and be utterly terrified, and still come back and read them again. So these early influences are so important to us. Therese, would you tell us a little bit about what some of your influences are and what inspires you and how you got into poetry as your medium?
Yeah, totally. So I actually came into, I've been reading and writing poetry since I was very small, ever since I realized that like people came up with the words on the page and books, like they didn't just like come from, the ether, right? But for speculative poetry specifically, I came into it from being an editor at Augur magazine. I came on as a poetry editor. Augur publishes a lot of mainly speculative work. And I was writing all these like non-speculative poems, but editing these speculative poems. So I thought I should write speculative poems also. Like I should just write the thing that I'm editing. So this is around 2019. So I'm still very new, still very recent. So I came to it out of like an editorial obligation. And I discovered that I really liked spec poetry. So I continued. And the challenge I think is like finding or like fitting the content and the aesthetic of the speculative into what I'm already writing. Because I read a lot about relationships and like romance and love and nature and things like that. And I'm inspired a lot by like visual media, like photography, movies, TV. I'm on social media a lot, and whenever I see like a really interesting like scientific fact or natural phenomenon, I bookmark it, and I'm like, I'm going to write a poem about that eventually. This could be a really cool horror poem, or this could be a really cool fantasy poem. And I'm finding a lot of joy and reward in like the way that it's affecting like my community and like sharing my work with other people. And I like to continue to do this in the future as well.
That's interesting to hear about the effect of visual medium has on even our prose writers. So Nicole, coming as a filmmaker, were you writing first? Were you interested in making films always? Can you tell us a little bit about your journey into visual?
Yeah, I actually started with poetry. I have been writing poetry as well since I could write. And, my mother introduced me to Nikki Giovanni when I was very young. My nickname is Nikki, so it kind of was just fit in there. And she does write a lot of children's books as well as some of her more well-known things. So a lot of Nikki Giovanni combined with Star Trek and Twilight Zone kind of led me into a lot of a fantasy and speculative mindset as a person in general. So I actually graduated with a degree in English, focusing on poetry, and then wrote novels and then got into film. Just fairly recently, within the last 5 years, I've switched over into film from my novels. So I really wanted to be able to see my novels on the screen. And I actually was talking to some screenwriters, and they said, well, you need to write it yourself then. Like, okay, well, I guess I'll have to figure out how to do that. So I figured out how to do that, and then really started realizing that if I want to see things done, I need to do it myself. So I started becoming a filmmaker and making contacts in the Seattle area where I live so that I could get some things done and create the film and the mediums that I wanted to see. That's how I did that.
Yeah, and you had a film that was selected for the Seattle International Film Festival, am I correct?
I did. Actually, it was a horror called Wretch, and it just screened last night again. So that was in the 2019. So I didn't realize how lucky I was. It was in the last in-person Seattle International Film Festival. My short film was. So that was my short film, and it definitely combines the speculative world to be able to get a message across, which is one of my biggest goals.
So let's talk a little bit about this visual and the sensory experience in your creation of worlds. All of you sound like there's a connection to creating, using the words to create these experiences that pop off the page, even that involve actual things that you're reading and the senses of how you're experiencing the world. So tell us a little bit about how your work interacts with those experiences in creating worlds. And whoever wants to jump in can just holla.
Okay, I can say that one of the challenges for me is that when writing prose and when writing poetry, I'm looking at trying to involve all the senses, all five senses, getting into, some people say that all seven senses. When you are working with film, that drops down to just sight and sound. And you can try to evoke the others, but what you're just working with are sight and sound in order to get people to actually feel those other emotions. Some people say that's a huge challenge, but it's interesting because in the written space, all you're working with is these little words. So it's kind of both more challenging and less challenging in terms of how you're going to create that world. Either way, though, I think that we are trying to tap into other people's emotions to create those worlds. We have to try to figure out what is the minute piece in order to create a full world. You're not just saying, here's this world, here's this picture. You're saying, okay, well, here is this tiny little piece of this child tying their shoe. And that's how you're going to get the emotion out. So it's kind of in creating the small piece to create the big world for me, for everything I do, regardless of the medium. That answers the question.
Yeah, I think that much of poetry, or a lot of poetry, interacts with like sensory experiences using words and language. And I feel like a lot of poetry is just describing things and like detailing things in various ways, and to paint a picture like for the reader, or to like purposefully like omit details so the reader can fill in that information on their own. I feel like is something that a lot of poets like have to work at and take a lot of pride in when they can do that successfully. Because poetry doesn't just talk about like seeing and hearing and touching. It's also about like how you feel and like how it feels to look at this thing or to experience this thing. And I think speculative poetry does a lot of that through its content. And I think it's really good at world building in particular. I love to see speculative poets world build in their poems, like the defamiliarization and the leaps of faith that these like writers will take. I just draw inspiration from that like all the time. And I feel like spec poetry is good at taking these sort of like core tenets of like describing and detailing, and then transforming it in like very lush and like intimate ways.
For me, for prose, like Nicole said, you try so hard to incorporate all of those senses, whether it's 5 or 6 or 7. And it's something that I brought up in my Modern Southern Gothic class, is especially when you're looking to create atmosphere in your work, it's so important to use as many senses as you can in order to create an emotion, because translating those words into an emotion is what we as creatives do, whether it's prose or poetry or screenwriting. You're trying to evoke an emotion in someone that they may not have ever pulled out of the piece that you're working on before. So looking at not only sight, sound, taste, smell, but looking at vibe, that sort of extrasensory feeling that people get when they meet someone or when they walk into a room. There's that almost a vibratory energy that some people haven't incorporated into their prose that I think is something that I try to put into mine, so that you not only get how a place looks and feels and smells and sounds, but you get that sort of underlying vibe of a place, which, especially for dark fiction, is so important for creating tension and atmosphere, so that even if nothing has happened quite yet, you know that something's going to.
So we're going to move into our next reading portion. Teresa's going to read for us. But before you read, I would love for you to take a crack at defining speculative poetry for us. What is it? What are we looking for? What are the hallmarks of speculative poetry?
Oh, wow. Well, I'll just say that most people, I guess, most speculative poets will define speculative poetry by its content, as opposed to its form, right? So like speculative poems are speculative poems because their content discusses like topics of like a speculative nature. And I feel like that's also how speculative fiction is kind of described. You can write poems about fairies and goblins, or poems about like aliens, or like myths and folklore, and all that is considered speculative poetry. And you can like, there are genres as well, like sci-fi, horror, things like that. But like my class is on metaphor, and what I like is that metaphor kind of messes all of that up. In that, are we talking about like literal vampires and literal aliens, or just metaphorical vampires, And I find that like that will sort of like expand the definition of the speculative within poetry. And it's something I'm really interested in exploring.
Wonderful. Would you share a little bit of your poetry with us?
Oh, of course. So I'm going to be reading from my second chapbook, which is called Manifest. And it's just filled with speculative poems. So I'm going to read two for you today. The first one is the title poem, Manifest. Everything here bleeds blue. Iron knots tinging the edge of needles, staining gauze after gunshot, but carbon just the same. The man who flew the ship, you call him master, lies supine under the dashboards while he communes with the stars. Nobody who lives here on this new rock owns anyone else, never has. The mountains remind you of Earth. There is a freshness in that they've yet to be scaled, mined for hope, innovated to death. 3 weeks here, and you are no closer to charting the people, forcing a schema into something so lovingly defiant. You like that you can't understand their language, that you find other ways to relay your needs and instructions. You let them touch your hair, something you'd never let Earth people do. One of them gives you strange fruits, and you bring it to your mouth until Master swats it away, opining about poison and gavagai. At night, you sneak away to join them for music under their new moon. Their bodies are their own and each other's. Here, freedom is its own language, a series of swirling joints and bulbs. It is attractive because it is foreign. Also foreign is the idea that you have a body too, that your body can be other people's bodies if you choose it. By the third hour, you decide you want to die here. The man in the ship has supplies to last a few years, but the landscape here shimmers like a cup overflowing. And you can run now. You can even fly. And the second poem I will read is the last poem in the chapbook, and it's called La Diablesse. She never walks completely on the, I want to say, sorry, content warning for sexual assault. She never walks completely on the road. She wears a dress, a shade of blue that doesn't exist, a color my mother saw when she nearly died, projecting me into this world, and the sky and water turn this godly shade. As a seamstress, an artist, my mother was never satisfied again. This blue woman is best friends with the dark and Flora. We don't talk about where she comes from. We wait for a man to drive by this lonely road at night, spot her, stop her. She wears a hat like a tourist, which she is. One leg in this land, one leg outside a slit, both hands grasping. Every man, I suppose, must compare to the deal maker. I never wondered how close she was with him, how deep she dipped her black toe into the vessel, into the role of vessel, of enemy. I imagine she is fine with the skin on her face, its leather and fur. The hat has a purpose. See, no man would go willingly. At the sound of his chirps, she casts a spell. Here is where I get jealous. When I was younger, a man followed me home and cornered me behind my father's garage, told me to lift my dress, remove my panties. Within spitting distance of hammers, drills, and acid, I did not comply, and then I do not remember. But perhaps I saw that same blue. The same blue this woman swishes, this woman animals and goddesses around night after night. The spell is in the disappearing, in the wild way he wails through the trees. When I first heard of her, I thought she'd have sex with them before their demise. Later, I realized it was never about sex. It was about power. I want to see her whole face, her victory pose, heifer on high, backlit by the moon as the man crashes to his grave. But there are different kinds of power too. When I walk alone, I walk half on the grass, half on the street. No one stops me these days. I wear pants. I bottle the lore my mind allows me to think about on days when I want to be controlled by a demon. Dream about blue when I want to die. Thank you.
I want to clap or cheer. Thank you for sharing those with us. So evocative, such an incredible sense of time and timelessness. And also I love the use of that blue appeared in both. It felt very, very distinct in the use of that. Can you tell us a little bit, each of you, about what your creative process looks like as you're moving toward deciding whether a piece is going to be poem or a story or a novel, or how you're going to present it visually?
I can start. So like when I decide that I'm going to write like specifically a speculative poem, I try to take something like literal, like something very clearly speculative, and then piece it apart, and then like try to vary the themes to explore like new ways that like the reader can take, because I don't want to do all the exploration for the reader, right? I want to leave some stuff for them to explore. And I ask myself, like, how many ways can I talk about this thing? And what themes can I sort of wrap it in for like the reader to unpack? I'm always thinking about the reader. I don't know why. I'm just thinking about the reader, the audience. So like I could talk about like, you know, like a robot or like a mermaid or something like that. But I can also talk about, you know, like ancestry or, you know, history or like power structures or things like that, all within the same poem. And I like to talk about all these grand things too. I like to see what I can accomplish through the metaphorical. So like in the poem, like I read the one about like the woman in the blue dress, it's about like the character Elijah Bless is a character of folklore, of Caribbean folklore, but I also use it to talk about like, you know, women and sexual assault and just enduring that as well, all within the same speculative poem. So yeah, that's kind of like how my process works.
For me, it's I write in multiple different mediums, and unfortunately, a lot of times finances comes into play as far as what I'm going to be putting into what piece. Like I'm writing a kind of an epic fantasy about multiple characters in a different world that would take hundreds of thousands of dollars to make as a film. And I want it out there before I think I'll be able to have those kinds of contacts to make that kind of thing. So for me, that's a novel. For me, that's a no-brainer that that's going to be a novel, so that I can stay and create all the amazing worlds that I want to, versus something that I want to get out there quicker, and that might have a timely message. Then that might be a film that I can collaborate with someone on and create that short film sooner than later. And the poetry, I can't stop the poetry. It just comes. And if it's going to be a poem, it's coming out, and it's going to be a poem right now. So that's kind of how I decide what's going to be what and how it's going to come out, what it's going to look like for the viewer and for the person who's actually going to consume this thing. Because ultimately, sometimes it does come down to who's going to be watching and reading as well.
For me, it does depend on the length of the piece. I write flash fiction as well as short stories and novels. So it depends on how many layers and sub-layers that there are to the idea that I've come up with. And there's always tons of ideas that I have flowing through. I have tons of notebooks to attest to that. And it's just which of these ideas do I think I can explore in depth, which would be more of a novel, pairing that with additional ideas and additional themes, or if it's something that's a quick hit and it's very simple but straight to the point and powerful, then that can be a flash piece. So it depends for me on the length of it and what do I think can fit with that initial idea. How can I draw it out and wrap it around either different characters' experiences or pair it with other things that maybe one character is going through, like in Root Magic. Jez has to deal with grief. She has to deal with bullying. She has to deal with learning her family's ancestral magic. She has to deal with racism and classism. So wrapping up so many different layers in one thing and with the point of view of one character, that absolutely had to be a novel-length work.
I think it is interesting to listen to all of you speak with such control over kind of knowing what you're trying to get to with what your final piece is. And then knowing the speculative elements and where you can put them. You know, I'm thinking, and Nicoles, you're talking about your novel, like this is where you have the most control over how you get across. Therese, incorporating the elements of speculative fiction echoing across times and across different themes, even knowing the length. You know, you all clearly have a very good grasp of both speculative elements and your medium. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about the tradition of those elements in the medium that you're working in now, and where you see your place in that evolution, present and moving forward.
I actually taught a class for SIF on Afrofuturism last year or January at some point. And we got into some of the very beginnings of where we saw speculative fiction in film, and it was with Sun Ra in the 1970s. And he created this completely out there film about someone, about an alien coming to Earth and basically convincing people that they needed to lift themselves up out of the slavery mindset and just become free from what America is and what colonialism is at this point. So this person, Sun Ra, was amazing in terms of he believed that he was from Saturn and just did all kinds of things and actually inspired George Clinton, who's probably a bit more well-known than him. So speculative fiction in film goes back to like the 70s and keeps on going through people all the way through TLC with their videos, into Janelle Monáe with her short films, with the movie See You Yesterday. There's a lot of different speculative films that have kept on going, and we are doing a lot more with Afrofuturism as time goes on. I think that my place in that is, I hope it keeps getting bigger, but there's a lot of people like me who are making short film, TV series, a lot of things that are really pretty cool out there that are on streaming channels, like the Fantasy Network is a streaming channel online, and you see it on Sci-Fi, you see it everywhere. And I think that my place in it, and a lot of people who are making these, we're trying to get messages out through film. And it's been done before, and it's going to keep on being done, where we're able to slowly convince people that the world can be better using this genre. And then as far as novels go, there's so much more, obviously, but I will leave that to you guys to talk about too.
Well, I guess I'll go next. The history of speculative fiction is a deep and rich one, but not one that is always associated with Black creatives. And a lot of people don't realize that Black authors have embraced the speculative for years. When you look at some of the writing of W.E.B. Du Bois, Pauline Hopkins, Zora Neale Hurston, a lot of those writers have incorporated the speculative in their works from 1900 forward. And as far as uncovering those works and realizing that a lot of writers who aren't as well known as the ones I've named have also created works that may have been buried through time, that people who have dedicated their lives to uncovering a lot of the work of these artists are now being discovered and being brought to the fore. And most of my writing is speculative. I've done a little bit of poetry, not anything near what Nicole and Therese have done, but sometimes I incorporate it into my fiction. So I think that crossing genres and weaving different strands together, looking at alternate forms of expression on the page and alternate formats is a way of going forward. Also incorporating a lot of historical information that heretofore hasn't been known by the wider world, that's only been talked about in families or talked about in small groups around certain select groups of people, are being brought forward in incorporating folk tales from different parts of the world in fiction, and being able to tell the stories that haven't really been told by those individuals who are of those specific backgrounds. So being able to have more diverse voices writing about speculative fiction, which we have done for years, but people just didn't necessarily associate it with us. For me personally, going forward, I would just love to have a mix of different lengths of fiction to my name. I would love to, when you look up Southern Gothic writers, be one of the writers of color that's there. When I research Southern Gothic writers, you don't see writers of color listed in that pantheon, and I would like to be listed there. I would love to move forward in having my work in a visual medium. So there are so many avenues that I would like to pursue, but most of it would be just making sure to bring my folklore and my voice and my story to everything that I do.
I think this is a great question. Thank you both, Nicole and Eden, for your responses. I think within the within speculative poetry, I feel like there's a long discussion in speculative poetry about what counts as speculative poetry, which I think is just like a poetry conversation in general, like what is a poem, what is not a poem. Like we can talk about, say, like Christina Rossetti's Goblin Market, which is like, oh, this is about goblins, very clearly speculative. But you can also talk about like Milton's Paradise Lost, right, which is about the Garden of Eden and like angels and things like that. Is that speculative too, right? Like what counts, and like why does that matter? And how can writers sort of explore or break these boundaries, or still like conversations that a lot of people are having, and it's great to see that still happening. There might seem at times, I feel like a push to sort of define borders a little bit more strictly and to make things like literal as opposed to metaphorical, which I can totally understand, especially when you're writing in a genre that like has been deemed by, literature as like, less than or something like that. And I'm really happy to see like poets nowadays being bold and fun with like literal speculative elements. I'm going to put a dragon in my poem. I'm going to put a mermaid or something like that in my poem. And I love to see that because I feel like poetry, especially like contemporary poetry, is like personal, like as well as political. So you're making movements and you're making statements in your writing. And I think this sort of can go across genres as well. But personally, I feel like the poem as a form, as a form, is already very speculative. So I feel like whatever we create within that form can be speculative as well, like whether or not we wanted to. Like discussions about like, is this poem really speculative or not? Just like, it's a poem, so sure, it's speculative. When it comes to like publishing work, I feel like editors will kind of decide whether or not they want to publish your poem. But as a writer, it's very freeing to just like put whatever I want in a poem. And I see myself as like someone who like plays with the idea of expectation within that genre, which is why I bring up like metaphor a lot, because I feel like metaphor does just that. I like that when my poems move, their arcs sort of stretch and bend beyond the literal and into the realm of possibility. And I'm still very new. As I mentioned, I started this in like 2019 or so. So I've still got a long way to go compared to like, giants like Mary Soon Lee or Akua Leslie Hope. But the less I know, the more I have to learn. So I'm just excited to be here.
I love it. I think we're going to move into Nicole's going to have a clip for us, and all of you have touched a little bit on both considering your reader or your audience, and in terms of your own work and the material, but also the length. So before we move into that clip, Nicole, would you talk to us a little bit about audience, or all of you can jump in too, reader interaction, editor interaction with your work, and how that either changes, reflects, or refracts what you're doing, and what the work is when it comes out, I guess.
That is huge. For film, it really, truly, obviously is a very collaborative process. I wrote a short film this past year, which we got to shoot it in August. And I'm working with my editor right now, because what I envisioned in my head, I was able to get onto the camera as the director. Actors were able to do it. And now that it's in editing, it has been held up for like 2 or 3 months because the editor doesn't see it. And so, going through that process, you have to get everybody on board with you so that that thing will come out the way that you want it to be. The original Star Wars is what it is because George Lucas's wife was the editor. And so she cut a lot of the crap out of it and made it something that was amazing. Once she was gone, it didn't do what it was needed to do to begin with. Your editor really can change it. And the same thing goes with when I, with one of my novels was with a publishing house, and the editors kept trying to change it. And that was a fight for me to try to continue to have the actual voice that I wanted in that novel that came out. And I think that with my writing in terms of novels and poetry, I'm less willing to compromise. I think that's really where it comes down to, because that to me, that should be something that's my name on it, and that's what it is. With film, you do have to let go a little bit and say, okay, well, that editor and the cinematographer and the actors and the director, if you're not directing it yourself, everyone has to have some kind of stamp on the film. So it's difficult as far as collaboration goes, and letting that actually have its own voice. And it depends on how much of a control freak you're going to be, and whether or not you have the title of executive producer, what's going to end up on the screen for film. And I do have that title, so that's why it needs to be what I need it to be. So yeah, it's about trying to keep something that you actually want it to be when you're creating something. I think that's hard, no matter which genre no matter which medium you're writing in. It's very hard to keep your voice steady throughout the process.
You'll get that title. You get that executive producer title. You got it. Teresa or Aiden, would you like to weigh in on that before we move into the clip?
I'll just mention that most of the time with short fiction, you don't work super closely with an editor unless they already have decided that they want that short piece of fiction, and they may ask for minute changes. And it's very rarely a rewrite or anything substantial. But I found with Root Magic, it was my debut novel, the first novel I'd ever written, the longest thing I'd ever written. And working with an editor, I initially was told several things that didn't really fit with my vision for the book. And like Nicole was saying, it is a challenge sometimes to work with someone and have that conversation of, this is my vision and this is what I would like to keep. I'm willing to change this, or I'm willing to clarify something, but at the end of the day, it's your name that's going on that piece of work. And it was important for me to include the languages Gullah and Geechee in my book alongside, let's say, standard American English, and being able to go back and forth between those 3 languages was really important for the theme of the book. And I had to have a conversation with my editor that those languages needed to stay in the book, and it was incredibly important, even though I was initially told that we don't use dialect of any kind especially in middle grade fiction. And I said, the book doesn't work without it. So I was able to keep all of that intact in the book. Thankfully, my editor educated themselves and just said, you're right, we want this book to be what you need it to be.
Wonderful. Nicole, would you introduce your clip for us, and we'll play that.
Sure. So this is a film called Such an Honor. It's a science fiction about an aging actress who has to determine whether or not she's going to upgrade into a synthetic body. This is set in the year 2050. This one I wrote and directed this short film. This is about half of it, and it's still on the festival circuit. It's played at multiple festivals, including Holly Shorts. And I'm going to be skewed from not having all of this whole list in my head, but lots of them. It came out last year. Oh, it was also the Seattle Black Film Festival, which is one of my favorites, and I must say that. Thank you.
So who made this killer outfit?
Welcome back to Danny's Fix, and a huge thank you to Misty Krumpke for her coverage on Beth Delaney.
Oh, I felt so bad for her. I would have loved to let her rattle on and on. She's royalty, for God's sake, but we gotta keep moving.
Of course.
And she's certainly not as young as she once was. She can't command a crowd like she used to.
Let's talk about that. Because I do think her inability to accept reality is what led to that awkward moment.
How does it feel to win the Lifetime Achievement Award?
Such an honor. I'm so thrilled they thought I deserved it.
And your haughty husband, Paul, is looking as handsome as ever.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that I got a Lifetime Award the same time Paul was voted most sexiest man alive. And he's 2 years older than me.
Tina Lovejoy!
I have a lifetime of acting left.
And we can't wait. Just promise us your upgraded face and body will be as beautiful as you were.
For those of you who don't know, upgrades have been happening since 2025.
Oh, I wasn't born then.
For the past 25 years, actors and really anyone who cares about what she looks like has been upgrading to a better, younger, synthetic body. However, upgrades do nothing for health, though. The first actress who did it was 46 years old.
Anyway, Beth's 52 already. The doctors can only do so much with such an old broad.
We had Misty's crew and our usual surveillance cameras placed throughout the after party. And Beth's situation didn't improve that night. Let's watch.
There you are. Oh, you've already got one.
Perfect timing. Jesus, I'm gonna need 2 more of these before I can even deal with this.
You're an actress, babe. Smile.
Yeah, I know. But what about that twat?
Yeah, she's a little shit, but she did have a point.
What?
Don't kill me. You're still beautiful. You know that. I know that. But if you want the world to keep thinking that, and if you want studios to keep hiring you as the #1 actress in the game, you gotta play by the rules.
Nobody's asking you to replace your skin with living plastic. It's not fair.
No, it isn't. But who the fuck ever said life was fair?
So you want me to get the upgrade?
Papaya's tuition won't be cheap.
can't hide forever. Why are you two up here? You should be out front, enjoying the moment, lavishing the attention.
Hi, Aaron. You don't have to worry about me tonight.
I'm not worried about you. You are a superstar. But I am advising you as your agent to get in the spotlight. There are no nights off, especially not tonight. But first, I need you to talk to those producers I told you about.
Now. Oh, come on.
My goodness, simply stunning. 65 and still flawless. Upgrades are a gift from God.
Bad.
And we are back. We have a couple of audience questions, so we're going to move into those so that we have time to answer them. And one of them is, how was it difficult for any of you in translating your early experiences and family lore into stories and poetry? Do you translate some of your family lore and early experiences into your poetry or your films?
Yes, no one's safe. Everyone goes into the stories. I've made it a point to make sure that I at least change people's characteristics if I'm going to use them in something. Actually, for this first couple books I wrote, I would base the main character on one of my friends and change them a little bit. I got their permission, but I did do some of that just so I could get some of the characteristics of the main character the way that I wanted to see them. And I've kind of find my friends fascinating. It's not too difficult, but I do get permission first if I'm going to be that blatant about it.
I'm kind of the opposite. I think my life is very boring, so I don't write about it in my work. As I write a lot of persona poems, so like it's kind of like fiction. So I'll invent a character, I'll invent an I, and then have the I talk about their life. So I don't write a lot about my family usually, or my personal life. Not because I don't think it's not because I'm like super private, because I'm not, but I just don't think it's interesting.
I do write about family stories, but a lot of that is folklore inspired. I think that one way to incorporate it, if that's something that you want to explore, is the route that Nicole takes, is just to go straight to the person and say, hey, I'd like to incorporate you or your idea or your story. I think that one of the things that I do incorporate is just sort of the language, maybe mannerisms or something of a person, not necessarily always the exact story, but picturing a person to put into your work is always a really clear way of making sure that person is a full and rounded character in the work.
Great, thank you. Another question is a really great one about support. We're all writing, creating, doing, and we need support. So where do you find your support from? Do you have family support? Do you have mentors, folks that are helping you along the way?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's fine. I was just going to say I am lucky enough to have family support. I think that is something that I do cherish and I do turn to in those moments where you have negative things happen. You either got a story rejected, or you didn't get feedback that you liked, or if you're a person that reads your reviews, you got a review that wasn't very positive. Or if you're struggling to in the creative process, you're struggling to bring a work to fruition, I do turn to family just for support in that. But also if you can find a group of writers or some sort of, I almost said the word conglomerate, but some sort of community to help inspire you when those challenges come, and they usually do come at some point. So people that can commiserate and understand is always something that at least makes you feel like this happens to everyone and I will get through it.
For me, the support that I need the most is that I get from my husband in terms of both physical support and helping me with our 2 kids so that I can have time to write. So that I feel like if you have children, I can't see how you can do the writing and much of any kind of demanding career without having that support from your partner or from family to help these small people who kind of want your time at all times.
Yeah, I have family support, like mainly for I live at home. This is my bedroom. I do not pay rent. My my parents work and they support me. But I also have support from a lot of people in my writing community. As Ethan mentioned, I have a writing group. I have people who I send my poems to immediately as soon as I write them, no filter. And they're really helpful in sort of telling me about which places I can submit to, or if there are opportunities that I should be applying to. And if I feel anxious, they're like, "Oh, but you're so great," and keep going. And that's sort of like that's how I get my support and how I continue to write and to be happy about what I'm writing.
It's huge to have that, both readers and I call them readers and cheerleaders, like people who can help you with the critique, but also can keep you moving forward. We all need that community. We're moving into the final piece of our time together, and I'm very sad because I'm having to chop questions from my own right and left. But I would love to hear more about what you're looking forward to in your work and the best places to find your work, where you're going to be next besides teaching classes for Clarion West, if you've got a class coming up. Tell us a little bit about where we can find you. Eden, where are you going to be at? Where are you at? What you up to?
Well, I guess I'll go first because my class with Clarion has already finished. I am, it might not seem like it, but I'm currently in hibernation because I have a couple of really aggressive deadlines for a few pieces. I'm working on my 2nd middle grade novel, and I'm also working on a 3rd middle grade novel at the same time. And I have a novella out for consideration. I won't say where. And a few short stories that are going to be coming out. But if you want to find me online, I am on Twitter at Eden Royce. I also have a website, which I don't update nearly as much as I should, but that's edenroyce.com. And on my Twitter, I believe on my bio, there is a link tree where I share all of my new publications and articles or interviews that I've done around the web. So you should be able to find most stuff out about me there. And I've recently found that Root Magic will be getting a paperback edition that will be out in April. So that is available for pre-order now, wherever you place your pre-orders.
Most of my work is on my website. It's just my www.myfullname, TerraceMasonPierre.com. A lot of my poems are published online, so they're just links there that you can read. You can also order my chapbook from the publisher, but all that's also on my website. And as well as for things I'm working on, I'm trying to finish a full-length book of poetry, and that's taking a very long time. But hopefully I'll get it done by early next year. So that's where I'm at.
My novels can be found on Amazon if you look up my name, Nicoles Pouchette, but that's not always given Amazon. There's also Smashwords, where you can download the books from Barnes & Noble and all kinds of things like that. My films are on Vimeo, on Shorts TV. Wretch is actually on Alaska Airlines. If you happen to be on Alaska Airlines, you can look up the movie and it's right there. I am currently working on a film called Lioness, which won a grant from Women in Film. So that was really wonderful for the year 2020. That should be out coming up next year. And the TV show that I write for is on Fantasy Network, and that is called Strowlers, which is also a speculative film, which gets into magic and what happens if the magic were real and the government was trying to regulate it. Lots of things going on in that film and that TV show, and it's a global kind of show. And my next upcoming class with Clarion West is called Turning Your Work into Short Fiction, which I'm really excited about. We're going to go through actually trying to, we're going to go through from start to finish how we're going to do that with log lines, outlines, and then creating a first draft of this piece. So it's a 2-week class, and there is time to actually get feedback and get through an actual thing. So I'm excited about that coming up the first weeks of November. Yeah, very soon.
Very excited about that class as well. It is coming up very, very soon.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I caught Strowlers last year, I think, on Amazon Prime in the middle of all of the oh no, what am I going to watch? I've watched all the Netflix there is, and I adored it. So I'm really excited that you're part of the project. And that's about it for our panel today. I want to thank our panelists for sharing your work and your thoughts with us. At this moment, there are still spots open into Raise and Nicole's upcoming classes. So Turning Your Work into Short Film is the 8th and the 15th of November. Power of Metaphor and Speculative Poetry is December 11th. And you can find out all of that information about those on our website under online classes. For more wise words from instructors, you can check out Pocket Workshop. That's a collection of short essays. It's now out from Hydra House Books. Also available through the website, and we'll put a link up for that. And finally, if you enjoyed this panel and you want more, please like it, share it, comment below, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, because that's where we'll post them when we're doing them next. So thank you, everyone. Time zone appropriate farewell, and we'll see you at the next panel. Thanks.